call it a movement. I'm not even sure it's a movement. It's a brand, or rather, it's a useful device for capturing the attention of an onlooker.
I
It's
see.
exactly what I did not permit the Forge to become. I never permitted there to be a Forge logo. I never permitted anybody to call their game a Forge game on their cover. So I avoided that specific thing, and I had reasons to do it. And it has happened with the OSR for better or for worse, but that's all it is.
Do you miss the Forge?
Not particularly. I gave up 12 years of my life um, to that effort. I miss a fair amount of the way we talked there, and I've tried to recapture it in lighter form, friendlier form at its play. I miss that, and I don't miss the perpetual struggle for status that people had there, which I killed with a hammer over and over again. But it's very hard
Yeah.
to kill, and it can do a lot of damage before you kill it. And so that was an ongoing effort that was very difficult, basically to conduct something that was not the internet on the internet.
Yeah.
That was extremely difficult and required daily attention. I put an
Makes
immense
sense.
amount of work into that one thing, which is a crap thing to have to do when you have an anarchist personality,
I see.
right? And yet you're saying, yeah, but just because I'm anarchistic and allow lots of individual views around me all the time doesn't mean that I have to tolerate stupidity and passive and expert cruelty toward others, which was
Precisely.
very very prevalent throughout the hobby. It's very prevalent throughout the hobby, both of those things, and also the in the early 2000s, the ability to use imposed status and passive aggressive behavior as power, the ability to do that was very well developed in the year during the 1990s internet. So the basically killing that with an axe, I had to do that every day at the forge, and I didn't miss that for a second. Um, and what another thing that I would miss is contact with people who are excited about their designs and willing to talk about them. But I get that now because I consult, so
Yeah.
that's good. And fortunately,
Okay.
I often consult for people I've never met, which was what I was afraid of. I said I'll go into consulting and it'll just be all my fucking friends.
Yeah.
And but no, I do a lot of consulting for people I've never met, and I really like that. So I do get that.
Is
Um,
there any game that you are looking forward to in particular?
hmm. Well, again, I have that habit that I mentioned about music and television.
That you don't follow the trends
Well, I
and
don't
the
look
late.
ahead very much. I tend to look around, and everybody says, "Oh yeah, that was great," 3 years ago, and I'd be, "Oh good, let me check it out." And they'll say, "But that's not the new thing," and I'm like, "Well, it'll be new to me." And so I will probably it's probably mean to some people that I know not to mention them, but I actually think that the ongoing hysterical excitement about what's about to come out is
Yeah.
not really a good thing. It's not
Makes
really something
sense.
I want to contribute to.
What was the latest game that was released that really got your attention and you really enjoyed and liked?
Ooh, that's really there's some things that really did excite me. I'm not so good at naming them right. I mean, I've spent the last 6 months completely buried. No, the last 2 years, really. But in terms of a recent project, completely buried in all of the old superhero games.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to shift my mind into, but I have been playing a lot of the new games. But if they come my way, but I don't think my mind is in the right place to answer that question. I
I
can tell you
understand.
all about um, you know, why I would love to get a copy of Golden Heroes from 1984
Yes.
because that's
Yes.
kind of where my head is. I've never seen a
Yeah.
copy of that game and I want it. But I'm more excited about that than I am about maybe some really, really great game that I may have played in the last 12 months that I'm not being fair to. It's just not where my head is to, have it ready to talk about. So I'm not very good for answering that question.
It's okay. It's okay. Recently I'm reading about Glorantha once again because I think about running a RuneQuest game in the future, and I happened upon one of your articles that was about Thed, the goddess of raid.
Yes, that's actually one of the pieces that I am most proud of ever having written.
Yeah, it's an
Thank
excellent
you.
read.
Yeah.
And I would like to ask you because I see that you are not afraid of talking politics. Do you think that games should include those terrible things that bring so much pain around us? Do you think that we should get to experience them through play and fight them, come to terms with them, engage them, understand them,
I
or
think
are you?
that my body of work is almost nothing but doing that.
Yeah, for
And
some
I would
for some
consider myself very
sorry
deeply
to interrupt.
invested, deeply invested in that thing. Now, if you're talking about personal choices, you see, you said whether games should do that. I
Yeah,
have to be careful with that. The only way I could answer that question is if you theoretically gave me power over that.
yeah,
And that's impossible. You can't give me power over what games will or won't have in them. I can't. I don't have that power, and I cannot conceive of having that power. So I can't tell you what games should or shouldn't have in them. Remember the anarchist? We'll see.
yeah,
We'll just see what
yeah.
they are. Why are you talking in metaphysics? I don't get it. And so, on the other hand, as a personal device, as a personal
Yes, consider it
perspective,
a personal preference.
I think it's absolutely apparent in my work that
It
that's a
is.
top priority for me. Whether it's highly explicit and historical, like Shahida, or whether it is barely disguised, as in Circle of Hands, or whether it is fairly playful and not particularly explicit, but emergent in some ways, and that would be Troll Babe or Slay With Me. Even in my more playful work, you will find, um, I think, content that leans in the direction exactly as you phrased it. I really liked the way you phrased that question. The way you worded that, whoever wrote
Yes.
that, wrote that exactly the way I want it to be worded. That
Yeah.
kind of content. And in my opinion, or rather in my applied history, the answer is obviously yes. It's not even something I say as a yes, it's just there, in the work.
I
So
agree.
I can't see. I mean, even Champions Now is predicated primarily on the experience of 1960s and 1970s comics. And although I draw on later comics too, the people who wrote the original Champions were very deeply affected by the comics of their age. And that's what informs the design of Champions very strongly. And it's very evident in a lot of the work of comics gaming in the 80s that people took the world around them very, very seriously as content, raw material for the comics that they effectively made by playing the games. And so it's evident in throughout all the rule books and the supplements and everything. And so really, I mean, in I talk about this kind of stuff a lot. This is one of my favorite examples. Maybe people are tired of it, but when Captain America discovers that the head of the secret empire, which has corrupted the government of the United States, is led by Richard Nixon,
Yeah.
and he goes to confront Nixon in the Oval Office, and Nixon, upon being unmasked, gloats for a minute and then shoots himself in the head. And it's all covered up by the National Security Council. And the National
Yes.
Security Council tries to shut down Captain America.
Unfortunately, I've never been into superheroes.
Well, what I'm
Never.
trying to get at, though, is that this was not.
This sounds very interesting and very political, and
It
this is
is.
something
It's
I would
completely
read.
so. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Whatever it is you are seeing in your Netflix and your movies right now is an extremely. It's not just a version, it is a sharp break with the content of the comics that it came from. That guy, Captain America, who's a very charismatic actor in a very commercially acceptable kind of role, has nothing to do with the Captain America whose stories have been massaged into those movies. There's no connection.
He's not radical anymore.
No, no, no. In Captain America, from the time that Stan Lee started writing him in the early Avengers, and especially into the 1970s, when he was written by Steve Englehart, was a very radical figure in many ways. More of a question mark than a direct radical statement, but a very powerful question mark. So those are some things that I'm trying to get at. Is that when I wrote Champions Now, I was thinking very strongly about comics that were rooted in the world we know and were written in a very visceral fashion, a very expressive fashion. And so that's where I'm getting at. Yeah, I mean I am that kind of creative person.
This is one of my the questions that are my own. So, and it's related to my previous one. And during my RPG Odyssey, one of the first games that I encountered after breaking, escaping, Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 was The Riddle of Steel, which is like the HEMA role-playing
Oh,
game.
it completely is. Yes, I have a very long-standing, tight relationship with the Riddle of Steel and with Jake Norwood. So yes,
And it had several references to Sorcerer.
yes.
So this is how I first. This is your first work that I ever read, Sorcerer. And there is something about Sorcerer that I have never run it. I've never played it. I have read it quite a few times. And one of the things that I have noticed is that every time after I read it, I feel depressed. Mainly because in every other game there is a part of escapism that, oh yeah, I wish that I was that heroic or something like that. Sorcerer has a much darker tone that is very grounded in the darkness that we encounter in our everyday lives. And I believe that this is one of the reasons that it made me feel uncomfortable after I read it, but uncomfortable in a creative way, not in a
Are
I
you
feel offended.
familiar with the rock and roll band the Velvet Underground?
Only the name.
Um, there is a phrase which has entered pop culture about the band,
Mhm.
which is that only 100 people bought the album, the first album, but every
Yeah.
one of them started their own band. And so, although I am happiest when people actually play Sorcerer, one thing I have noticed is that it tends to have some kind of. It's not that the book has a transformative impact, it's that upon reading the book, the person decides to give themselves their own transformative impact.
Yeah.